Justin Trudeau today claimed vindication after American lawyers, the US attorney to be precise, filed an indictment accusing an Indian government official of having a hand in what America is claiming is a foiled plot to kill Khalistani Gurpatwant Singh. I'm Barkha, Dutt, here with the Mojo story. Our focus today is on the geopolitical implications of this a big international story. India has responded with caution, saying it takes the developments extremely seriously and that India has already announced a high powered panel that will be looking into these investigations. In some ways, the indictment was expected, but the details are staggering. The essence of it, that a government official that remains unnamed in the US documents basically hired an intermediary called Nikhil Gupta. Nikhil Gupta, according to these documents, boasts of having a nexus in the international narcotics trade. Gupta is then ostensibly or allegedly basically used to reach out to both a source and a hitman, both of which, according to these documents, turn out to be assets of the American administration. The hitman, to be precise, is in fact an undercover official with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States of America. The mind boggles, and Netflix could not have made this up even if it tried. What are the geopolitical implications? India has responded in a very different way to the United States and the documentation it has placed, and it did to Canada. But the complicating bit is that the documents, if you go through them carefully, actually join the dots between Pannu and Nijjar, and not just because Pannu was Nijjar's lawyer, but also because the documents claim that this said Nikhil Gupta sent a message to his source, the source he was using to allegedly unleash a murder plot on Pannu through, and talks about Nijjar being a target for India in Canada. What a complicated, complicated doesn't even begin to describe it. What a complicated story. To make sense of it, let's introduce our guest on the program today. Let me introduce everybody one by one. We're joined by veteran diplomat, Ambassador Dileep Sinha. Let me welcome him to the program. We're also joined by Suhasini Haidar. She's, of course, a strategic affairs analyst and the diplomatic editor at The Hindu. We're joined by military veteran General Dhruv Katoch. Welcome to the program, sir. Joining us from the United States of America today is Lisa Curtis. Lisa has, of course, served as an official in the Trump administration. Is presently a director with the CNAS think tank. And also joining us from Canada is Terry Miluski, one of the world's foremost experts on the Khalistan project. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Ambassador Sinha, let me start with you. The mind boggles. It is a bizarre account. Basically, the end part of it is even more bizarre. We knew some of this after the Financial Times report came up. But now the claim is that the hitman allegedly hired by this Indian intermediary called Nikhil Gupta turns out to be an American undercover cop. I mean, are you able to make sense of this entire story, and what are your first responses on the geostrategic implications of this?
Well, from what I see of it, what I have learned now, this is obviously a very serious matter. What is also appears is that our people, our spy agencies, if they are involved in it, and so it appears, then they have got into a big mess, and they've done a fairly shoddy job of the job that they were supposed to be or pretending to do. These kinds of things happen all the time internationally. All countries indulge in such activities. Clearly, our spy agencies were amateurs at this game, and they have got caught with their pants down or with their hands on the gun, shall we say. Now, here I think the government's response is correct. This has to be investigated carefully. And if anybody here in India is involved in it, he should be punished, not because what they were doing was wrong. All countries do it, but because they did such a shoddy job of it. If there were telephone conversations taking place, that is a complete no-no in any, even the diplomatic world. It is a no-no in the world of espionage. It's completely unheard of. You don't leave such fingerprints behind. And in this kind of a situation, obviously, we'll have to do a lot of legwork to contain the geopolitical fallout of what is going on. We'll have to have some deal struck, as always happens in this kind of a situation globally. But it has to be handled very, very carefully and very intelligently from this point onwards.
Now, you're basically saying that the problem is not so much that this is a rogue operation. The Americans are certainly known to have done their own rogue operations. That this is a rogue operation gone horribly wrong. It's clumsily done. Is that the argument you're making? Going by the evidence placed before an American court in New York City.
Yes, as I said, all countries, name any major country to me, all countries have done this in the past, including Canada. The US, of course, is the past master at it. So it is not a game that is not played internationally. Our people are amateurs at this, and they have made a mess of it. They've done a hash of it. And therefore, India has egg on its face right now.
So you do believe that India has egg on its face right now. Is there a differing perspective? Before I go to a Canadian American guest, General Katoch, might you have a different view at this point? Or do you share Ambassador Sinha's concerns that forget the morality of taking out a terrorist? This is about doing it so poorly that India is left with egg on our face. I'm quoting the ambassador, General Katoch.
Thank you, Barkha. That is, of course, taking the assumption, the way the Americans are claiming, that India is involved. Now, I think that's a very long shot. Simply to state that there is a chap, he's been apprehended now in Czech, and he hired somebody. Now, that's all right. I agree with Ambassador Sinha when he says that all countries do it. But in this particular case, they will have to prove that the individual involved was directed by the government of India. And I don't see that proof coming. You see, but what the Americans need to answer, and what the Canadians also need to answer, is why are they hosting terrorists on their soil? They know that this particular individual who was targeted has actually claimed to down an Indian Airlines, an Air India aircraft. Now, if that is not terror, then the United States and Canada should educate us what exactly is terror. So,
Yes.
When we are looking at this Pannun character, he has been creating trouble. He has been inciting people to violence in the United States. And there are three countries which are directly responsible to support them: the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. Now, in my view, there is no presumption of guilt. Let the United States give us the evidence. It will be examined by Indian courts, not by the American courts. And we will come to our own conclusion based on the evidence they give. But one thing is certain, I think we have to take up the case very strongly. The West needs to relook at its policy on terrorism. We have excellent relations with the United States. We don't want them to be disturbed. But at the same time, I don't think we can let the United States get away with simply stating a particular course of action and holding the government of India liable for the same. Barkha.
Yes, sir. Let me take that to Lisa Curtis. Lisa, in your tweet, you spoke about the potential impact of this on Indo-US relations. One, to be clear, and please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, some of these details were clearly known to the Americans even well before the G20, and the Americans went through everything in Delhi when Biden was here. So there's a question mark on how badly it might impact relations, or whether it's just a little bit of noise, as it were, in the water. That's question one. But the question two is really the question that General Katoch raised, that even if, as Ambassador Sinha argues, this is an covert operation gone wrong, what about the fact that this man with dual citizenship of Canada and America has openly incited violence against Indian diplomats, has openly threatened to blow up Air India planes, whereas if you go through the indictment documents, he's described as a critic of the government and a Sikh secessionist. There's actually very little mention or presentation of him as someone with terror links. Lisa, how are you looking at the story from Washington?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Barkha. I would say this is the biggest challenge to U.S.-India relations in probably the last decade, probably since the Devyani Khobragade episode, which took place just about 10 years ago. I think that it's surprising that the Indian agent would think that he could get away with, assassinating a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. It's a pretty brazen attempt that was made, and it was certainly a brazen attack that was carried out against the Sikh activists in Canada. So, I think that if India takes the U.S. concerns seriously, which they appear to be doing, they can assure the U.S. this will never happen again. Then I think, that the U.S.-India relationship can move forward because, of course, there are huge stakes in it for both countries. China is the number one national security concern for both countries, and they recognize they need each other to manage that threat. So I do think there is a way forward, but I would just emphasize that it's really important that India take this seriously and not sort of brush this aside. And I don't think that this is a case of just, oh, they didn't get away with it. That's the problem. No, the problem is that they were seeking to assassinate a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. And I don't agree that all countries do this kind of thing. The U.S. is not running agents inside India and trying to assassinate Indian citizens. It's just not happening. So I think that, this is a challenge to the U.S.-India relationship. I think it's one we can get through, but I don't think that we should downplay the seriousness of what happened. It was a brazen, bold attempt that was made. And I think that we need to get the facts out about this Pannun person. I frankly don't know that his history. It seems that from the Indian perception, he has actually incited violence against Indians. I think you said he was involved in an attempt on an Indian Airlines. I think what he said,
he threatened it on video. We're in fact playing that video clip right now. I'm not raising the sort of audio on it to not amplify his words.
So
but he
what he says, though, is that he was calling for a boycott of Indian Airlines. So I have not listened carefully to it. I can't tell you, what his motivation is, but that's what he says. And I have to believe that the U.S., if they knew that he had links to terrorism, that they would take legal action. The U.S. is not shy about acting against terrorists. So I think that, this is what needs to be sorted out, is what India may consider terrorism and what the U.S. Considers that this individual has been doing. Is there hate speech? Is that the issue? I think this is what we need to determine. But I don't think in any way, shape, or form India should be downplaying this the seriousness of what this DOJ unsealed indictment says.
Let me actually push back just a little bit before I open up for the implications on what you've just said. That the fact that there isn't enough awareness, even at your level, about Pannun's terror links. Let me actually get Ambassador Sinha or General Katoch to come in on that before I open it up, or even Terry. General Katoch, do you want to take that?
Yes. You see, there's enough evidence given by the Indian intelligence agencies, both to Canada and to the United States, and also to the United Kingdom, about the activities of certain people, the so-called Khalistanis, who are working against Indian interests. We have seen what they have done. Those video stills are available. And so for any country to live in denial, I think that is not appropriate. Especially as Lisa says, the United States does not do it. Well, they killed the Iranian general in Syria. Now, what is that? So for the US to actually, deny all these things, it's not done. Every country does it. There is a level of acceptance. But as Ambassador Sinha said, if this has been done by India, I presume it's a very shoddy job done. Nobody leaves such a trail behind. But for that trail to be left behind, it has to be proved first. Barkha.
Yes. Yes, and actually, I just want to make the point that there was the Kanishka bombing that is being revived in the collective memory of Indians, that was carried out by groups associated with the so-called Khalistan cause. There are Gurpatwant Singh more than once is on record asking the Hindus of Canada to leave. He has represented Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who is also known for his terror links. But yet the fact that today Terry, Lisa Curtis says that, look, Americans may be viewing this allegation of terrorism very differently. You have spent years documenting the Khalistani project, talking about the proliferation of these groups in your own country as well as the rest of North America. And today you tweeted saying that America has come in a way to Trudeau's rescue. America has bailed out Trudeau. Your comment on what happens next?
Well, what happens next is that India has got to treat this completely differently than it's tried and failed to treat it so far. As you know, India's immediate reaction to Trudeau's allegation that the Indian government was behind the murder of Mr. Nijjar on June 18th in Surrey, British Columbia, was to say, this is absurd. Absurd was the word. Well, that denial now looks a little bit absurd in my view. And so India has to radically change course now. Instead of just brushing it off, saying, no, it didn't happen. They've got to accept that, yes, it did happen, and that, no, it's not true that everybody does it, so it's okay, or that maybe everybody doesn't do it, but we're justified in doing it because Pannun is a terrorist. Let's be clear about Pannun. Pannun says that he only called for a boycott of Air India. I disagree with Lisa on this point. He did say that it would be risking your life to fly on Air India. That's not the same thing. That's a threat. And that's exactly what we heard a couple of weeks before the Kanishka bombing of 1985.
And he specifically named the World Cup final, the date on which it was taking place, the link to Indira Gandhi. So, Lisa, I do urge you to hear that video.
There is much more, though.
In fact, if we can pull out, I'll send you the clip later. Just have a look at it. But Terry, go ahead. Yeah.
There's much more, though. We have to be clear that Pannun says hypocritically that he's all for democracy. He is, in his words, for ballots, not bullets. He's running this referendum campaign. He's democratic. So why has he named that referendum campaign all across Canada, for example, after Talvinder Singh Pannun, the Kanishka bomber? He lionizes famous Khalistani terrorists and treats them as heroes after they mass murdered innocent civilians. That's who Pannun is. Now, having said all of that, the question that you asked, what comes next? I've said that India has to completely change course. I think they have to accept now that this morning, as a result of this indictment, Prime Minister Trudeau looks a whole lot better. It's impossible now to dismiss his allegations. Oh, Trudeau's an idiot. Trudeau's making it up. He doesn't have any evidence. Turns out, yes, he did have a lot of evidence, and it's the same plot. The plot against Nijjar in Canada and the plot against Pannun in New York was the same plot by the same team. Now, the real question coming up next is, how does India pretend that it's got some deniability here, that CC1, as the FBI calls him, the man who was allegedly the Indian government official who was the mastermind of this scheme, which is now blown up in India's face, that CC1 is somehow deniable. Can India make the case that this man, who was a serving employee of the Indian government, has always been so, has a background in security and intelligence and weapons, and apparently had the means, apparently sent the money. I mean, the money was real. They gave a picture of the money that was the advance payment for the murder of Pannun in the indictment. So the question is, for India, how do you now deny that this Indian government official was indeed an Indian government official and acting in something that was not a rogue operation? India has to say now, and I expect they will, that this guy was running a rogue operation. It was not approved by the Modi government. The problem is, I think that's going to be an uphill struggle, considering that India's credibility now is in tatters as a result of the very convincing evidence laid out in the FBI's indictment yesterday.
Right. And let me bring it to Hasani. Isn't that the real challenge, right? I think you made this point on our last program that India was responding very, very differently to the Americans than to Canada. And the point then was made was that the Americans had also handled it very differently from the Canadians. You know, Biden didn't stand up in US Congress and make the allegation. But the documents join the dots between Niger and Pannu in a way that they argue that the same so-called undercover source, and Nikhil Gupta talk about Niger being a target for India and Canada. To me, that is the real problem. That how does India now explain why there's one set of responses to America and one set to Canada? Why not tell both countries to take a walk if that indeed is our position?
That's right, Barkha. And let me tell you, today there was a briefing by the Ministry of External Affairs. It was meant to be a briefing about the Prime Minister's visit to the UAE for the COP climate summit. But many of the questions were really just about this case and how the government reacted to it. And what seemed to be evident was that India continues now to say that we take what the US has said very seriously. In fact, they said that the linking of an Indian government official, remember last week on the show, most of the panelists were even doubting that an Indian government official had been linked so far. But now it's there in black and white. And the MEA said that the linking of an Indian government official is a matter of concern. It also said, whereas when it was asked about the reaction to Canada and whether now that this indictment includes evidence, as an indictment, or allegations that the same person who was trying to engage the services of a hitman for Pannu had actually at one point even segued and said, by the way, there is this person in Canada. Do you think you can carry out a hit in Canada as well? And then 2 days before Niger is killed, that is on June the 16th, there is a message saying, it's okay, we found someone to do it. So all of this is in the indictment, and I think that indictment has to be read very, very clearly as to what the US has been trying to say. So yes, the first point is that India's reaction to the US and the reaction to Canada that has been completely disparate has to be reconciled in some way, because the US is now accusing India of exactly what Mr. Trudeau in Parliament did. The US has now put it in its indictment. I think that's one real important point. And another, I think, Barkha, that we really do need to take a step back, because obviously here what has really lost out is diplomacy. A chance for real diplomacy in the last few months has been lost completely with India's reaction to to Canada in terms of, expulsions of 2/3 of the Canadian High Commission, in terms of canceling visas and all the rest of that. I think what should be looked at very seriously, and Lisa said, this is the biggest challenge since the Cobra Gardi incident to India-US ties. I think from the Indian perspective, they need to really ask those questions. One, you have asked, how is Pannu allowed to operate in this very free and open way and even be, in a sense, backed up by the FBI, backed up by the US indictment that's made such a big deal of this plot? But the second question that really should be asked about what the US has done in these 5 months, according to the Washington Post, and it's not been denied by anyone, the US has raised this particular plot and all the evidence at levels like the president. Biden has raised it. Blinken has raised it. You've had Jake Sullivan raise it with Ajit Doval. You've had, this is all according to the Washington Post, but as I said, it has not been denied. You've had the CIA chief, reportedly, Bill Burns, coming to Delhi to talk about it. You've had Avril Haines, the Directorate of National Intelligence, speaking in Delhi about it. This is much more than perhaps just an add-on to what Canada had accused India of. The second thing the US has done is it has made it clear that its concerns on the plot against Pannu actually predates the killing of Niger. And I think that's very significant, because it means that when India was actually countering the kind of allegations that were made in public by Canada, actually it had already got a backlog of these allegations from the United States. And the third is by the point that you made, Barkha, about the fact that the two people that Nikhil Gupta was speaking to turned out to be a confidential source and an undercover official, it means somewhere there that the US agencies were already aware of the plot, as it were, coming out of India.
And
That in
and,
fact,
and that and that would take many Indians to a conspiracy theory that was the fact that the hitman hired allegedly to kill Pannu an entrapment. Was it a trap? That is what a lot of Indians will be asking, Suhasini.
I think these are all questions to be asked, which will have a longer bearing on India-US relations as well. But I think the time has gone where the Indian government can continue to talk about, a moral high ground over here. If the point is going to be that, yes, we did it, yes, these are the kind of plots that we wanted, then the time to even admit to these perhaps is a little far ago. I presume there will be a diplomatic way out of this. Some officials will be moved. But I think the longer term impact on India's engagement with the United States will have to be looked at.
So, Lisa, let me ask you a question from an Indian perspective. You said that this is going to have a potentially huge impact on Indo-US relations. It's the biggest challenge in a decade. That's a big statement. But if you saw, and I'm not saying go by social media, but I thought that some of the comments to your own tweet were quite telling of public opinion here. One, Indians will talk about American hypocrisy, that the Americans went in, took out an Osama bin Laden, took out a Baghdadi. Who are they to lecture? But two, let's say this is a botched up covert op by India. Let's say the Americans have assiduously gathered documentation. India responds to it. The question still remains, why should Gurpatwant Pannu be able to act with the impunity he did? And again, I urge you to listen to the videos that show him asking Hindus to leave Canada, that warn people not to board Air India planes on a given day, which is in fact Indira Gandhi's birthday. The same Prime Minister of India that has been assassinated by these very groups. The fact that there have been posters calling for violence openly against Indian diplomats. These are, the Indian public opinion, irrespective of political affiliation, sees Pannu as a terrorist, and the acts of sort of open incitement to violence against the Indian state are well documented. So the question from the Indian perspective might be, why is America giving shelter to this guy? And Ajit Doval is reported to have told his counterpart that he believes that Pannu is a CIA agent.
Okay, well, let me unpack that. That's a lot. That's an absolutely ridiculous statement that Pannun would be a CIA agent. Why would the U.S. want to interfere or disrupt U.S.-India relations? President Biden has said many times the U.S. relationship with India is one of the most important of the 21st century. The U.S. has invested incredibly in this relationship. The agreement to co-produce jet engines is just one example of how the U.S. is moving forward in its defense technology ties with India. The fact that the U.S. was aware of this plot going back to at least June, if not earlier, maybe the spring, as Suhasini was saying. And Biden, still came to India. There was a very successful meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden in September. You had a 2+2 taking place with Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin going to New Delhi just a few weeks ago. So clearly the U.S. wants to sort of compartmentalize this issue and move ahead with the strategic partnership with India. And it's not going to do anything that would intentionally interfere with that relationship. That's just nonsensical.
Just to clarify, the CIA Sorry, I just want to clarify briefly. The CIA reference, it was reported in the Hindustan Times quoting India's national security advisor. That I just want to clarify that, but please go ahead.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. But also, let's be very careful in our wording, what we're talking about here. If Pannu has been involved in terrorist activity, then by all means, the U.S. should be taking legal action. And, he has made very provocative statements that could be classified as a threat. And, for that, the FBI should be all over him and should be doing whatever legal action is possible to stop him. I agree that the Khalistani, the Sikhs for Justice, are extreme in their positions, and I don't think there's any support for their positions inside India. They're a sort of rogue fringe element. I absolutely agree with you on that. But it's a different story to say, well, since they are verbally threatening India, India has a right to go on U.S. soil and assassinate a U.S. citizen. I think these are two very different things, and that's where we have to be clear. And if there's any silver lining that comes of this, maybe it will be that the U.S. and FBI will be watching more closely and taking more action against some of these Sikh activists who are making these extreme statements and inciting, as you said, Indians to violence. But I think, let's just be very clear. You cannot, you cannot assassinate somebody for something they have said. And the difference, Soleimani, plenty of evidence that he was involved in, violence and attacks that killed many Americans. Reams of evidence on that. So I think we need to be very careful in how we're classifying terrorists and the actions that should come as a result of either what they've said or what they've actually done.
Okay, let me open this up. We have just about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to request all of you to henceforth keep your interventions brief. Ambassador Sinha, listening to Lisa, are you concerned that she classifies it as the biggest challenge to Indo-US relations in a decade since the Devyani Khobragade case? Ambassador.
Well, it is certainly a challenge to our relations. But here I'd like to point out that there are two levels at which we have to deal with this matter. One is at the level of internal matter, where internally we must ensure that we clean up put our house in order. If there is anybody involved here, take action against that. As far as externally is concerned, we have to confront the US and Canada with the fact that these are not people who are making statements. These are people who are carrying out terrorist actions. Pannu has been designated a terrorist by India. There is evidence of that. So the US cannot and the Canada cannot keep ignoring our concerns and pretending that these are people who are fighting for only for a freedom of speech. It is not that. These are terrorists, and externally we must confront the US and say that if they expect any cooperation from us, then they also have to take action against these people. It is not possible for India to believe that we can promote India-US relations at a time in a manner in which people who are threatening our diplomats, people who are celebrating the killing of Indira Gandhi, are living freely in America. If American citizens have to be protected, they should also believe in international law and not conduct terrorist operations in other countries. So it is we have to be very firm on this in our dealings with the US. At the same time, take action internally to clean up our own house.
Right. I think that's a pretty fair statement that, take action against any officer, a government official who may have been involved in this, but confront the Americans and the Canadians with more evidence. Terry, what happens now? Trudeau gets a breather, more than a breather, perhaps. So when India comes with that evidence, what happens?
Well, it depends whether India is able to make a plausible case, as I said earlier, that CC1, the alleged master spy of this plot, this murder spree that was planned with not one, not two, but several Khalistani figures, it remains to be seen. Can India make a decent case that this was a rogue operation, that it was not officially authorized by CC1's higher-ups? I'm sure he didn't write the orders down if he did get orders from on high. So perhaps it's hard to prove that this was approved by the Indian government. And I commend to you the difference between what the Canadians did and what the Americans did. The Canadians directly accused the government of being party to this, but the Americans in their indictment have been more subtle and more clever. They have not said that. They have simply charged the lower level people. They have not alleged that CC1 was acting on behalf of the Modi government. They've held back from that. And in turn, India has reacted differently, saying, yes, we're going to investigate. We set up a panel, whatever. So there is room for a nice diplomatic solution whereby India says, oh, rogue operation, sorry about that. Nothing to do with us. We never liked this guy anyway. We fired him long ago, or thought we did, whatever. And he will, serve some prison sentence after 5 years from now. They'll have a trial, and then they'll quietly let him go and give him a gold watch for his retirement. So there's scope for a nice little diplomatic solution, but there's no way around it now. It's no use for India to argue, as I've heard some of this morning on your show, that, well, because this guy's a terrorist, we should somehow be entitled to wipe him out. It's okay. Everybody does it. No, it's not okay, and everybody doesn't do it. And I don't think that this argument is going to help India to argue that it's all right to wipe out terrorists and we're going to all re-elect Mr. Modi in the elections because it's popular. It still doesn't make it right just because it's popular. And Indians are free if they wish to vote for a world in which the man in charge, the guy at the top, decides who's guilty and who shall live and who shall die in my country or your country. I think due process of law is a good idea.
I think we'd all agree with that, but this is now a very complicated mess, Suhasini, because the very, very cautious response from India to the Americans today complicates how we might respond to Canada going forward. And I'm wondering how that tightrope will be walked.
Well, as I said, Barkha, I think the real failure right now seems to be of diplomacy. It seems as if every other kind of arm of the government has been allowed to prevail for the last few months. And the role of the MEA has been reduced to a kind of, damage, limitation, covering up sort of role. I think, therefore, it is time really for the government to go forward and something I say on your show very often, really come clean about what they actually are saying. You cannot evince surprise at what Mr. Trudeau said. And let's be clear, Mr. Trudeau said in Parliament that there's credible evidence against Indian government agents. That's exactly what the United States is saying. In a senior Indian government official who is still in charge, who is still in government, is responsible for directing an assassination plot. That's what the US is saying. It's pretty much what Canada is saying. So India is going to have to decide how they want to deal with this, both in terms of how they're dealing with their counterparts, but also in terms of public diplomacy. I think the idea that they could just keep saying this is a high security matter, or this is about inputs, this is this is about bilateral security cooperation. That time has gone because the US is no longer holding to that. The US has not just put everything into an indictment. It has made it very clear that a lot of the evidence in that indictment could not have been got in the normal sort of way by just getting hold of somebody's telephone in the US. There's clear evidence that there was a sort of, pre-surveillance going on, a sort of operation, which I'm not sure is even legal in Indian terms. And the US has made it clear that it had certain suspicions. It has been able to find proof for those suspicions, both in the US and Canada. There's a bit where, apparently they say there are 3 more hits in Canada that are still planned apart from the Pannun hit. All of these you can dismiss as hearsay. But now that they're in an indictment, and now that a grand jury has decided that the charges can stand up in a trial, I think the government is going to have to come out with a little more than what they have said so far. On the one hand, to say absurd, motivated, baseless when it comes to Canada, some of that is either going to have to be walked back, or there has to be some kind of a new tack that the government takes in terms of, as I said, it really is time for the MEA to do what it is meant to do, is to build relations, to build public diplomacy.
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but literally, I know you're all are short of time. So General Katoch, very quickly, and then I'll give a 30-seconder to Lisa and Ambassador Sinha. General Katoch. Yeah.
Oh, well, Barkha, in my view, I think diplomacy has to take the course now. The Indo-US relationship is much too important to be sacrificed on the altar of what is perceived to be an assassination attempt. So both politically and diplomatically, I think this needs to be handled. But there is another issue which needs to be handled. I think if let me give the credit to the Americans that this is an operation which actually has taken place. To presume that the government of India at the highest level, that Prime Minister Modi is directing these attacks, I think that is a bit too far-fetched.
No, I don't think anyone's saying that. I don't think anyone is saying that. But there is a reference to a government official.
No, I think Terry made that statement that the Prime Minister has to back down or something like that, basically. So you see, at the government at the highest level, nobody gets involved. Anybody who has a knowledge of these operations, what we call in the military as black operations, they are kept very close to the chest and they're kept at the lowest level. So if it has taken place, that is one aspect which needs to be looked into. The second aspect, very briefly, I'm quite certain that if this has taken place, there is a leak somewhere within the government or within the Indian intelligence agencies. I think we need to buckle up and find out what that is. Otherwise, we are compromising our own security. Barkha.
Yes. Very briefly, Terry, I don't think you were making the point that the Prime Minister is involved in this. You were making the point that the public may reward the Modi government if they believe this has happened. Right, Terry? I don't want to speak for you, but very quickly. Terry?
Yes. Be very, very quick. We hear this a lot, that, hey, Modi's facing election. He's going to be re-elected in a landslide, because lots of Indians, and by the way, lots of Canadians too, will say, well, if he's running around wiping out terrorists, good for him. We'll vote for Modi. I'm just cautioning that that's not the end of the argument. There is a real problem if that argument runs away with it.
Got it. Lisa, what would Washington be looking for from India at this point, publicly and privately?
So I agree absolutely with everything Suhasini said. There is a diplomatic solution to be had. If India takes this seriously, if India can somehow, assure the U.S. that, nothing like this is going to happen ever again, I think this will be helpful. And this can be done largely out of the public eye. I don't think there's any reason that there has to be, a lot of publicity around this, because it is such a sensitive issue. And then I think on the U.S. side, maybe there's something more that the U.S. can do to control, some of these elements that are causing concerns in India. I think that's what we have to recognize. The U.S. has concerns about this assassination plot. Well, India has very serious concerns about Sikh activists, a fringe element inciting violence inside India, which also needs to be dealt with. So I think, there is a way forward here. It seems like we, have seen the first steps toward that way forward. And, there's too much at stake. The two countries have invested far too much in this relationship over the last few years to allow this to impact relations in any, long-lasting way.
Right. Ambassador Sinha, closing comment. Would you agree with Lisa on that last point? That diplomacy has to now swing into action? There are mutual concerns. This can be resolved privately?
Absolutely. I totally agree with her that if the US takes action against these terror groups that are plotting to break up my country, then yes, our relations can move forward. And I think in any case, government of India should take action against any rogue element that is there in this government. Not only a rogue element, it's also a very dumb element who goes around, identifies a person to be his killer who is already an American agent. And why would America be tapping all Indian officials? So obviously they were tapping this Mr. Gupta, Nikhil Gupta, and some dumb Indian official decided to contact him, of all people, to go and take some action against whatever they were supposed to do. So this is a case of absolute shoddy job in India by some people. Government of India should take action against that. But India-US relations can move forward on a solid footing only if the US takes action against these elements.
All right. I think in Lisa and Ambassador Sinha's closing comments, you see both the space for agreement, but also the points of divergence. And if this is going to, I don't know if this is going to get worse before it gets better. There's also the elephant in the room. What happens to Canada with Trudeau saying, I told you so. So a lot of minefields ahead. And as Hasani said, perhaps the Indian government will have to change tack, shift gear. But in the meantime, I've already taken more time than I had said I would. So thank you to Lisa Curtis, to Ambassador Sinha, to Suhasini, Terry, and General Katoch. Thank you for a feisty but civil conversation. The story isn't going anywhere, and we hope to be talking to many of you again soon. And to our audience, thanks as ever for watching. See you soon. Mojo Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.